Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 23 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, and we have started chapter 14. Yes, which is titled The Material World is the Great Forest of Enjoyment. First of all, our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nera Vishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapatarubhyascha kripas sindhubhya eva cha, paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Very good. So, devotees, we have started the first section of this chapter 14. The section is titled, Shukadeva Goswami gives a detailed description of the forest of enjoyment, and it's from verse 1 to verse 41. We've read through all the verses and came back and then started as usual, going through the verses again, but with their purports, and we finished verse 6. So here we are, devotees. Now we're starting again on verse 7. Translation. Sometimes the living entity is interested in the yellow stool known as gold and runs after it. That gold is a source of material opulence and envy, and it can enable one to afford illicit sex, gambling, meat-eating, and intoxication. Those whose minds are overcome by the mode of passion are attracted by the color of gold, just as a man suffering from cold in the forest runs after a phosphorescent light in a marshy land, considering it to be fire. Yes, let's have a look at Srila Prabhupada's purport. So Prabhupada refers to the first canto when Maharaj Parikshit met the personality of Kali Yuga. So he was going to kill him because of the terrible abuse he was doing to the cow and the bull. He was going to kill him, or at least, Prabhupada says, make him leave the kingdom and reside in places of illicit sex, life, intoxication, meat-eating, and gambling. But Kali, of course, appealed to him that I'm surrendering to you, I'm taking shelter of you, so you're basically duty-bound to give me a place, and I can only live where those four activities are going on. So Maharaj Parikshit then thought that you can stay in a place where gold is being hoarded. And it's not mentioned there at that time, but what is mentioned elsewhere, at least I've heard, is that there was no one who was hoarding gold. What to speak of doing intoxication, illicit sex life, etc. But I heard that there was one man who was thinking of hoarding gold, and Kali went to live in his mind. So anyway, gold encompasses those four sinful activities. So in spiritual life, should be avoided as much as possible, because wherever there's gold, there are those four sinful activities. And Prabhupada makes the point that because the people in the West have lots of gold, therefore they're victims of those four sinful activities. And gold, of course, glitters. If you've ever seen molten gold, liquid gold, it has an effulgence. Oh, it's quite amazing. And the materialists are attracted by that, the glitter of gold. But actually, as the verse says, this verse 7, it's like stool. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, a person with a bad liver generally passes yellow stool. The color of the stool attracts a materialistic person, just as the will-o'-the-wisp attracts one who needs heat. Let me just throw in another little thing, which I've heard, is that gold, when it's first extracted from the ground, in the past, in certain places, at least in America, people found gold in rivers, and there was what they called the big gold rush in the Klondike area, which is somewhere in North America, and they found lots of gold. But now, currently, what goes on, like here in South Africa, as I hear, the majority of the world's gold is being mined here, but it's being mined from underground, and even way underground. And when it first comes up, the gold ore, it is black. Yeah, it is black. Sort of like coal, same blackness. Yes, okay, anyway, verse 8. Sometimes the conditioned soul is absorbed in finding residential quarters or apartments and getting a supply of water and riches to maintain his body. Absorbed in acquiring a variety of necessities, he forgets everything and perpetually runs around the forest of material existence. So Prabhupada makes the point that the businessman, a businessman who's not so successful, goes to the forest to find some cheap things to sell at a profit. And being absorbed in this whole program, somehow maintaining body and soul together, trying to make a profit and improve his material possession, he forgets his relationship with Krishna. So material activities are the conditioned soul's only engagement. But even if he gets enough, he wants more and becomes more entangled. On many occasions I've mentioned that when I was a child or a teenager, I imagine, probably a teenager, many years ago, there was a documentary on television about the world's richest man at that time. His name was J. Paul Getty, an American. And in this documentary, he was interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, "Do you have a philosophy of life?" And Mr. Getty answered, "Yes, I have a philosophy of life, and it can be summed up in one word: more." Yeah. And that's effectively the philosophy of life of so many materialistic people. So, yeah, in this mentality, the person feels they need more and more comforts, material facilities, and this and that, and a better this. He may have one already, but he needs a better one, etc. So Bhagavad Gita 3.27 confirms Prakrite Kriyamanani, the bewildered spirit soul under the influence of the three modes of material nature thinks himself to be the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by nature. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, due to lusty desire, the living entity creates a certain mental situation whereby he wants to enjoy this material world. He thus becomes entangled, enters different bodies and suffers in them. Verse 9. Sometimes, as if blinded by the dust of a whirlwind, the conditioned soul sees the beauty of the opposite sex, which is called pramada. Being thus bewildered, he is raised upon the lap of a woman, and at that time his good senses are overcome by the force of passion. He thus becomes almost blind with lusty desire, and disobeys the rules and regulations governing sex life. He doesn't know that his disobedience is witnessed by different demigods, and he enjoys illicit sex in the dead of night, not seeing the future punishment awaiting him. So in the purport, Prabhupada points out that in Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, verse 11, Lord Krishna says Kamos me, sex life according to the religious principles is me, is Krishna. And it's only for children, it's not for enjoyment, it's not like a recreational activity. But the thing is that the materialists don't believe, they don't understand that the material nature is being managed. And they don't know if someone does something wrong or whatever a person does, but here we're talking about doing something wrong, illicit sex, that it's witnessed by demigods. So therefore the person thinks when he enjoys sex life, secretly in a certain sense, in some room, in a dark room somewhere, he thinks that no one knows, but the agents of the Lord see. And therefore he's punished. So now, of course, there's lots of abortion from unwanted pregnancies. This is all witnessed, and the man and woman are punished. So illicit sex, Prabhupada makes the point, this is very important, please note this. Illicit sex is never excused, and those who indulge in illicit sex life are punished life after life. So Bhagavad Gita chapter 16 verse 20 confirms this. I'll just read the translation Prabhupada gives. Attaining repeated birth among the species of demoniac life, such persons can never approach me. Gradually they sink down to the most abominable type of existence. So second paragraph, those who take part in abortions are aborted. Whatever you do, you get in return. So on the positive side it said, if you give mercy, you will receive mercy. So if we preach Krishna consciousness, we will get mercy from the Lord, directly and or indirectly. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, illicit sex is the most prominent sin due to lusty desire. When one associates with the mode of passion, he is implicated in suffering life after life. Verse 10. The conditioned soul sometimes personally appreciates the futility of sense enjoyment in the material world. And he sometimes considers material enjoyment to be full of miseries. However, due to his strong bodily conception, his memory is destroyed, and again he runs after material enjoyment, just as an animal runs after a mirage in the desert. Yes, so Prabhupada comments, the main disease in material life is the bodily conception. And struggling to enjoy, but being baffled again and again, the conditioned soul may realize this temporarily, but then he tries again to to enjoy based on the conviction that I am this body, and happiness in life can really only, or at least mainly, but only, be achieved through enjoying the senses of the body. So, Prabhupada makes the point that a person, not everyone, but some people who associate with devotees, many people associate with devotees, and some become very good devotees. But some people who associate with devotees, they may become somewhat convinced of the futility of material life, but still they can't give it up. Even though actually they'd like to go back to Godhead, but they're just too attached to material enjoyment, particularly illicit sex life, usually. So in this case, Prabhupada says the Lord is kind enough to take away all their material possessions. And Prabhupada refers to Bhagavatam 10:88-8, which says, Yasyaham anugrinami harishye taddanam shanai. Prabhupada comments, Lord Krishna says that he takes everything away from the devotee whom he specially favors when that devotee is overly attached to material possessions. So then the devotee feels helpless, frustrated with the family, etc., and surrenders to the Lord. So this is special mercy for the devotee. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 22:39, Lord Chaitanya says, or is it maybe it's Lord Krishna, since I am very intelligent, why should I give this fool material prosperity? Instead, I shall induce him to take the nectar of the shelter of my lotus feet and make him forget illusory material enjoyment. So the Lord understands the devotee who's hesitating to engage in devotional service and who has like the doubt, maybe I should try to revive my material life. Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, after repeated attempts and failures, he fully surrenders to the lotus feet of the Lord. The Lord then gives him directions, and attaining happiness, he forgets all material engagement. Verse 11. Sometimes the conditioned soul is very aggrieved by the chastisement of his enemies and government servants, who use harsh words against him directly or indirectly. At that time his heart and ears become very saddened. Such chastisement may be compared to the sounds of owls and crickets. So Srila Prabhupada gives a short purport. We will just read the whole thing. There are different types of enemies within this material world. The government chastises one due to not paying income taxes. Such criticism, direct or indirect, saddens one. And sometimes the conditioned soul tries to counteract that chastisement. Unfortunately, he cannot do anything. Verse 12. Well, in regard to that, he can't. The government chastises him for not paying his taxes, but he can't do anything. There's a famous old saying, probably American, that you can't beat City Hall. You cannot avoid City Hall. No, you can't dodge the government if they're out to get you. Verse 12. Due to his pious activities in previous lives, the conditioned soul attains material facilities in this life. But when they're finished, he takes shelter of wealth and riches, which cannot help him in this life or the next. Because of this, he approaches the living dead who possess these things. Such people are compared to impure trees, creepers, and poisonous wells. So, Prabhupada comments, wealth which is received from previous piety shouldn't be misused for sense gratification. That's like enjoying the fruit of a poisonous tree. But if we engage those possessions in devotional service under the guidance of the spiritual master, one will be happy in this life and the next. Otherwise, you're eating forbidden fruit. This is from the Bible, the story of Adam and Eve. Adam wanted to eat the forbidden fruit, which was a special apple, and he eventually did, and then he lost paradise. So if we eat the forbidden fruit, meaning use things which come from our previous activities, some assets, or even things which come to us in Krishna consciousness. But if we use those things for sense gratification, we will lose out. So Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 27, another famous verse, Yat karoshi yad ajnasi. The translation is, O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as as well as all austerities that you may perform, should be done as an offering unto me. So we shouldn't try to possess more than what we need, just the bare necessities. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if one gets more than is needed, the surplus should be fully engaged in the Lord's service. That will make the conditioned soul, the world, and Krishna happy, and this is the aim of life. Verse 13. Sometimes to mitigate distresses in the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul receives cheap blessings from atheists. He then loses all intelligence in their association. This is exactly like jumping in a shallow river. As a result, one simply breaks his head. He's not able to mitigate his sufferings from the heat, and in both ways he suffers. Broken head and the heat. The misguided conditioned soul also approaches so-called sadhus and swamis who preach against the principles of the Vedas. He does not receive benefit from them, either in the present or in the future. So Prabhupada makes the point. Cheaters are always there. In material life and in spiritual life. Cheaters who manufacture their own way of so-called spiritual realization. So to get material benefit, the conditioned souls sometimes may approach them for cheap blessings, but they don't get any benefit, spiritual or material. Some of these people, these cheaters, can possibly show some magic, produce some ashes, or even maybe create gold. And the foolish followers think they're God. This cheating is prominent in Kali Yuga. Second paragraph, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes the real guru. And he Prabhupada quotes the first verse of the Gauravastakam, the prayers to the spiritual master we sing at Mangalarati. Samsara dava nala lida loka, trinayakaranya ganaganatvam, praptasya kalyana gunana varsya, vande guru shri charanaravinda. And Prabhupada gives just a paraphrasing of the meaning. One should approach a guru who can extinguish the blazing fire of this material world, the struggle for existence. But the problem is many people want to be cheated. So therefore they go to yogis, swamis who can do tricks. But that doesn't help reduce the difficulties of material life. And if making gold is a criterion for becoming God, why not accept Krishna, who has created this universe which has tons and tons of gold? So people shouldn't be allured by even gold manufacturing gurus, what to speak of those who manufacture ashes, but rather one should approach a devotee like Jad Bharat. So Jad Bharat instructed King Rahugana so nicely that the king became relieved from the bodily conception. So one should approach a guru as Bhagavatam advises, 11.3.21, and we just read it, I think yesterday. Tasmad gurun prapadyeta jigyasu shreya uttamam. One should approach a bona fide guru to inquire about the highest benefit of life. So that guru is described as follows. Shabde pare chanishnatam. He doesn't manufacture gold or juggle words. Rather, he's well versed in the conclusions of Vedic knowledge. Vedaischa sarvir aham eva vedya. He understands the meaning of Bhagavad Gita 15:15, which we've also come across so many times during this course. And this guru is a person who is freed from all material contamination and is fully engaged in Krishna's service. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if one is able to obtain the dust of the lotus feet of such a guru, his life becomes successful. Otherwise, he's baffled, both in this life and in the next. Verse 14. In this material world, when the conditioned soul cannot arrange for his own maintenance, despite exploiting others, he tries to exploit his own father or son, taking away that relative's possessions, although they may be very insignificant. If he cannot acquire things from his father, son, or other relatives, he's prepared to give them all kinds of trouble. So Prabhupada makes the point that one time he saw a man steal his daughter's ornaments, his own daughter's ornaments, to maintain himself. And Prabhupada mentions there's an old English proverb, necessity knows no law. In other words, when people are struggling sufficiently, they are willing to do anything to get out of it. So when the conditioned soul needs something, he forgets his relationships and may exploit his own father or son. So Srimad Bhagavatam says that times will come in Kali Yuga when a relative will kill another relative for a farthing. A farthing is an old, very old English coin, a quarter of 1 penny. And even for that matter, Prabhupada says they may have children just to eat them. Hare Krishna. Sorry about that. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, without Krishna consciousness, people will deteriorate further and further into a hellish condition wherein they will perform abominable acts. Verse 15. In this world, family life is exactly like a blazing fire in the forest. There is not the least happiness, and gradually one becomes more and more implicated in unhappiness. In household life, there's nothing favorable for perpetual happiness. Being implicated in home life, the conditioned soul is burned by the fire of lamentation. Sometimes he condemns himself as being very unfortunate, and sometimes he claims that he suffers because he performed no pious activities in his previous life. So, Prabhupada comments in the purport. Actually, Prabhupada refers again to the first verse of the Gurvastakam, Samsara Dava Nalalita Loka. And he says, a life in this material world is exactly like a blazing forest fire. No one goes to set fire to the forest, yet the fire takes place. Similarly, everyone wants to be happy here, but the miseries simply increase. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, sometimes a person caught in the blazing fire of material existence condemns himself, but due to his bodily conception, he cannot get out of the entanglement, and thus he suffers more and more. Verse 16, government men are always like carnivorous demons called rakshasas, man-eaters. Sometimes these government men turn against the conditioned soul and take away all his accumulated wealth. Being bereft of his life's reserved wealth, the conditioned soul loses all enthusiasm. Indeed, it is as though he loses his life. So Prabhupada comments that the word Rajakula Rakshasa is very significant. So Bhagavatam was compiled 5,000 years ago. But even then, government men, 5,000 years ago, were referred to as Rakshasas, carnivorous demons, or actually cannibals. So if the government people become opposed to someone, the person will become bereft of all his riches, which he's accumulated with difficulty over a period of time. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, actually no one wants to pay income taxes. Even the government men themselves try to avoid these taxes. But at unfavorable times, income taxes are exacted forcibly, and the taxpayers become very morose. Verse 17. Sometimes the conditioned soul imagines that his father or grandfather has come again in the form of his son or grandson. I mean, I've seen cases like that. But as the verse says, it's just imagination. In this way, he feels the happiness one sometimes feels in a dream. And the conditioned soul sometimes takes pleasure in such mental concoctions. So Prabhupada says that out of ignorance about Krishna, the conditioned soul imagines all sorts of things. The conditioned soul comes together with family members in this life like straws come together in a river, but then in a moment they're thrown apart. We all know this example. Family life is like that. But sometimes they think that after the father or grandfather passes away, he's come back again in some form. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, sometimes this may happen, but in any case, the conditioned soul likes to take pleasure in such concocted thoughts. Sometimes it may happen, it's not impossible, but generally it's just imagination, concocted thoughts. Verse 18. In household life, one is ordered to execute many yagyas and fruitive activities, especially the Vivaha yagya, marriage ceremony for sons and daughters, and the sacred thread ceremony for one's sons. These are all the duties of a grihasta, and they're very extensive and troublesome to execute. They're compared to a big hill over which one must cross when one is attached to material activities. a person desiring to cross over these ritualistic ceremonies certainly feels pains like the piercing of thorns and pebbles endured by one attempting to climb a hill. Thus the conditioned soul suffers unlimitedly. And I can say I remember once when I was on the Navadvip Mandal Parikrama, one time we went on some route and we came to this stretch, not maybe like half a kilometer or something, and it looked like just powder sand, but so fine, just like powder. And we thought, this is great. And of course we were barefoot, and we started walking on it, and we found that just under this fine sand were these sharp little rocks, and oh Krishna, we staggered along with difficulty. So anyway, Prabhupada says, in different countries, there are many different social functions which you have to do to maintain a prestigious position. In India, a father has to get the children married, and then his family responsibilities are complete. But particularly now, arranging marriages is difficult. And who's going to do the ritual nicely? Who can afford a really nice ceremony? So it's distressing for householders, like being pierced with thorns or hurt with pebbles. I remember just before COVID, I think it was 2018, we did Vrajmandal Parikrama. We went to Nandagram, and there's one family there who I know. The father is one of the main pujaris in the big temple on the top of the hill. Banki Bihari is his name. And we came, he gave us prasadam, and then he said, you know what? My daughter is getting married. You got to help me. Please ask all the devotees to give money for the marriage. And we always ask the devotees to give a donation because he gives prasadam. But anyway, so I just told him, look, I'll ask them to give money, but as they normally do. So this is distressing. But material attachment is so strong that despite the suffering, they cannot give it up. And it's similar amongst the Westerners, at least in the big families, the wealthy, well-known families, not even wealthy, but kind of established families. The weddings of the children have to be done nicely. So second paragraph, Prahlad recommends in Srimad Bhagavatam 7.5.5. I'll just read the paraphrasing of the translation that Prabhupada gives. The so-called comfortable family position is compared to a dark well in a field. If one falls in a dark well covered by grass, his life is lost, despite his cry for rescue. Therefore, devotees, listen to this. Advanced spiritualists, advanced devotees say it is best not to enter the Grihastha ashram. Better to stay a brahmachari or brahmacharini, but particularly brahmachari, because there's too much pain from the thorns in the Grihastha ashram. Anyway, in Grihastha ashram you have to accept so many invitations, do so many rituals, some you can't afford, although you're very attracted by these things. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, to maintain the Grihastha lifestyle, one has to work very hard to acquire money. Thus one is implicated in material life, and he suffers the thorn pricks. Verse 19. Sometimes due to bodily hunger and thirst, the conditioned soul becomes so disturbed that he loses his patience and becomes angry with his own beloved sons, daughters, and wife. Thus, being unkind to them, he suffers all the more. So Prabhupada refers to Vidyapati, who has sung. I'll just read the translation. The happiness of family life is compared to a drop of water in the desert. No one can be happy in family life. But according to Vedic civilization, you can't give up family responsibilities. However, today there's a lot of divorce, even in India, but even in ISKCON. It's due to misery in the family. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, sometimes due to misery, one becomes very hardened toward his affectionate sons, daughters, and wife. This is but part of the blazing fire of the forest of material life. Verse 20. Shukadeva Goswami continued speaking to Maharaj Parikshit. My dear king, sleep is exactly like a python. Those who wander in the forest of material life are always devoured by the python of sleep. Being bitten by this python, they always remain in the darkness of ignorance. They are like dead bodies thrown in a distant forest. Thus the conditioned souls cannot understand what is going on in life. And the purport, material life means becoming absorbed in eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And of these, sleeping, Prabhupada says, is taken very seriously. Of course, when you sleep, you forget everything, and you forget the goal of life. So Prabhupada makes the point, so for spiritual realization, one should try to avoid sleep as much as possible. The 6 Goswamis in Vrindavan, they hardly slept. Maybe 2 hours a night, maybe less, maybe nothing. Sometimes nothing. Prabhupada also, he didn't sleep much. Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I remember George Harrison told us once, he was meeting with Prabhupada and they were talking about sleeping. And George Harrison or Prabhupada, one of them mentioned that Mahatma Gandhi hardly slept. Sometimes when he was sitting on a train, he would just doze off. Otherwise, he wouldn't sleep much at all. And Napoleon, I don't know if it was Prabhupada or George Harrison, said that Napoleon would only sleep when he was riding on a horse on the way to the next battlefield. So anyway, Prabhupada concludes the purpose by saying, they were always engaged in spiritual cultivation. Nidrahara vihara kadi vijato. Following in the footsteps of the Goswamis, we should try to reduce sleeping, eating, mating, and defending. Verse 21. In the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul is sometimes bitten by envious enemies, which are compared to serpents and other creatures. Through the tricks of the enemy, the conditioned soul falls from his prestigious position. Being anxious, he cannot even sleep properly. He thus becomes more and more unhappy, and he gradually loses his intelligence and consciousness. In that state, he becomes almost perpetually like a blind man who has fallen into a dark well of ignorance. So actually there's no purport to verse 21. It's the first verse in the whole chapter so far which hasn't had a purport. But let's read verse 22, which has a purport. The conditioned soul is sometimes attracted to the little happiness derived from sense gratification. Thus he has illicit sex or steals another's property. At such a time he may be arrested by the government or chastised by the woman's husband or protector. Thus, simply for a little material satisfaction, he falls into a hellish condition and is put into jail for rape, kidnapping, theft, and so forth. Right, so Prabhupada's purport. It is typical, of course, of material life that the people engage in illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, and meat eating, which puts them always in dangerous conditions. Meat eating, intoxication excite the senses more and more, and then the conditioned soul falls victim to women. So, but to keep women, money is needed. And to get money, one begs, borrows, or steals. And he may commit some abominable act that causes him to suffer in this life and the next. So the spiritually inclined people must stop illicit sex, must stop. And of course, even many devotees fall down due to illicit sex, and they may steal money. They may even fall down from the renounced order of sannyas. So then, for a livelihood, they may take some menial job, or even become beggars. So Srimad Bhagavatam 7.9.45 says, Yan maitunadi grihamedi sukam hitu cham. Materialism is based on sex, whether licit or illicit. Not here exactly, I don't think. Not here. But elsewhere, Prabhupada says, licit or illicit sex, there's not a big difference. So sex is full of danger, even for householders. Bahu dukkha bhak. After one engages in sex, there are many volumes of miseries which ensue, and one suffers more and more in material life. So a miserly person cannot properly utilize his wealth. Similarly, a materialistic person misuses the human form of life. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, instead of using it for spiritual emancipation, he uses the body for sense gratification. Therefore, he is called a miser. Verse 23, learned scholars and transcendentalists therefore condemn the materialistic path of fruitive activity because it is the original source and breeding ground of material miseries, both in this life and in the next. So Prabhupada comments, through ignorance, the karmis, the materialistic conditioned souls, they create situations whereby they suffer in this life and the next. And unfortunately, they're so attached to sense gratification, they cannot appreciate how materialistic material life is now in the future, how it was in the past. So the Vedas say we should wake up to spiritual consciousness and do everything to get the favor of the Lord. Prabhupada confirms this by referring to Bhagavad Gita 9.27. We just referred to it, I think, was it yesterday or maybe even today. Yat karoshi yad ajnasi. O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as all austerities that you may perform, should be done as an offering unto me. And there's a third paragraph. Actually, all of the results of all of our activities should be utilized not for sense gratification, but for the mission of the Lord. And of course, the Lord in Bhagavad Gita gives all information about the aim of life. And at the end, Prabhupada says, he demands we surrender to him. And I remember when I first read Bhagavad Gita, after I'd been a devotee just some weeks, I came to the end. Krishna says, surrender unto me. And I remember thinking, yes, I must surrender. And I tried to, and I'm still trying to. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, people do not generally like this demand, but one who cultivates spiritual knowledge for many births eventually surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord. And Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita 7:19, Bahunam janmanam ante ganavan mam prapadyate. Verse 24, stealing or cheating another person out of his money, the conditioned soul somehow or other keeps it in his possession and escapes punishment. Then another man named Devadatta cheats him and takes the money away from the person who cheated that money from another person who had possessed it earlier. Yes, so then another man named Vishnu Mitra steals the money from Devadatta and takes it away. In any case, the money does not stay in one place. It passes from one hand to another. Ultimately, no one can enjoy the money, and it remains the property of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Right, the purport. So riches, wealth comes from Lakshmi, goddess of fortune, and she's the property of Narayan, the Lord. So she can't stay anywhere except by his side. So another of her names is Chanchala, restless, that she may step aside from him and give someone some money, but immediately she steps back to the Lord. And then so the next time that person who got some money from her, he tries in the same way to worship her, but he gets nothing. Yes. So she, Lakshmi, cannot be peaceful unless she's with him. And Prabhupada gives an example. Lakshmi was taken away by Ravana, and what was the result? His family opulence and kingdom was taken back from him, and his life even, his body. But anyway, his wealth and kingdom and everything was reunited with Lord Ram, who was the original possessor of it all. So Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, verse 29, the famous peace formula. All riches belong to Krishna. Second paragraph, foolish materialistic people steal money from other thieves, but they can't keep it. So the best way to possess Lakshmi is keep her by the side of Narayan. This is the point of the Krishna consciousness movement. We don't worship Lakshmi, we don't worship Radharani separate from Narayan or from Krishna, only together. This is the point of the Krishna consciousness movement. So we collect money from various sources, but we use it in the service of Radha and Krishna. So if we live like this, then the devotee automatically lives in an opulent way. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, However, if one wants to enjoy Lakshmi the way Ravana did, he will be vanquished by the laws of nature, and whatever few possessions he has will be taken away. Finally, death will take everything away, and death is the representative of Krishna. Verse 25, being unable to protect himself from the threefold miseries of material existence, the conditioned soul becomes very morose and lives a life of lamentation. These threefold miseries are miseries suffered by mental calamity at the hands of the demigods, such as freezing wind and scorching heat, miseries offered by other living entities, like mosquitoes bite you, and miseries arising from the mind and body themselves. So, therefore, even the so-called happy materialist constantly has to endure these threefold miseries. No one can counteract them. These miseries, the three of them, they may all come at once, or maybe two at one time, or just one. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, thus the living entity is full of anxiety, fearing misery from one side or the other. The conditioned soul must be disturbed by at least one of these three miseries. There is no escape. So verse 26, as far as transactions with money are concerned, if one person cheats another by a farthing or less, they become enemies. Farthing means, well, they haven't made them for a long time, because you can't buy anything for a quarter of a penny. Just like in India now, you can't buy anything for 1 rupee, or certainly not for paisa. So therefore, they become enemies, even if the one person cheats the other by small amount. So Prabhupada comments, this is called samsara davanala, the fire of material existence. Even in ordinary transactions, there's always cheating, because we have the 4 defects. And cheating, there's philosophical cheating, like the theory of evolution, it's cheating. But particularly, cheating comes out in financial dealings. So then even friends become enemies. Prabhupada says, a philosopher accuses an economist of being a cheater, and an economist may accuse a philosopher of being a cheater when he comes in contact with money. So one may profess a high philosophy, but when in need of money, he becomes a cheater. The scientists are cheaters. They present so many bogus things in the name of science. They propose going to the moon, but in the end they cheat the public of lots of money for their experiments, and they can't do much very useful. Prabhupada says they can't do anything useful. So unless we find a person transcendental to the 4 defects, we should not accept advice from anyone and become victims. Like it said, if you want directions, if you're driving, trying to go to some place you don't know where it is, ask at least 3 people. Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the best process is to take the advice and instructions of Sri Krishna or his bona fide representative. In this way one can be happy in this life and the next. So we will conclude here, devotees. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.